Somebody told me that when I first started teaching that I should treat my students the way that I treat my kids. And if you knew me, that is some crazy fucking advice. Because over the years, students have pulled some shit. And it's like, man, if you were my fucking kid. Anyway, when it comes to investing, my kids follow a very specific plan because I make them follow that plan. And if you were my kid, I would make you follow the same plan. And so if you want to learn how to invest like my kids, this is the system. All right, let's break down the system step by step. It's the exact system that I make my kids follow, and it works perfectly for most of the students that are in my classes. Here's where we start. Okay, I'm going to teach you how to invest. And this is the approach that I personally think every college student should take. And I'm not just saying that. When I first started teaching, the president of the school that I teach at gave me some advice. And he said, listen, you'll be totally fine as long as you treat your students like your kids. And so I've sort of been doing that for the last 10 years. And so far it's worked. But here's the point. The strategy that I am going to share with you, it's the exact strategy that I force my kids to employ. Both of my kids invest, and they're both following this strategy. And it's basically a 3 to 4 step process. The first one is getting started, like you actually have to do something. Second thing is you have to diversify. You can't just put all of your eggs in one basket. Third one, you have to do it for a really long time, and you have to be consistent, right? So if you do those 3 things, chances are things are going to really work out for you. Okay, so in more detail, getting started. Man, if I were to go back and listen to the conversation that I had with Kenyon and Kason and Therese, they all talked about, so I gave them $100 each, and they all talked about how much they procrastinated doing the assignment. And it wasn't because they were lazy. It was because there was a ton of anxiety and total confusion. And because of that, they just never really got started. And that experience is similar for tons and tons of people. There have been studies that have looked into why don't certain individuals hit their financial goals. And the number one most common issue across most individuals is that they never get started. So the people that do reach their financial goals actually got up off the couch and did something. And the ones that didn't reach their goals, the most common underlying factor was that they never got started. And so I would encourage you to just literally do anything, but to get started, right? That first step, it's not about being right and it's not about being perfect, but it's about setting up the accounts. It's about going through the process of linking your checking account to your investment account, or even trying to find the right bank to open up an investment account with. So hopefully, use this lecture or video as an opportunity to get started. Okay. Step 2 is you want to diversify, right? So what do I mean by that? I mean, you don't want to put all of your assets into one thing. Meaning, say you had $400, you don't want to put the $400 in Bitcoin. You don't want to put the $400 in Apple computer. You don't want to put it in Tesla. You want to diversify. You want to put it into as many different types of investments as possible. And the easiest way to do that, and what I make my kids do, is I have them invest in what we call the S&P 500 index fund. And so the S&P 500, it is just a group of stocks made up of the 500 biggest companies in the US, okay? And so if you're investing in 500 different companies and one company has a bad day or a bad month, hopefully all the other companies sort of counterbalance that. And the more that we diversify, the more that we are saving ourselves from detrimental losses. And so diversifying, and again, the easiest way to do that is to go with the S&P 500 index fund. There's so many different types of index funds that you can choose. And man, if you choose any of them, it's probably fine to get started. And in fact, Kaysen was talking about the approach that he took in the episode that I just recorded with those guys. He was like, yeah, I just like opened up an account, Googled how to start investing on YouTube, and the video that he came across recommended some approach, and it even, I think, recommended some index fund to invest in. And so he just picked something and put his money into that. And that's what I would encourage you to do. Okay. So if you think about it, the last thing about diversification, getting started and what to pick, when you're young, okay, when you're young, you can afford to take on a lot of risk. But when you're young, you also have a few things, like a few superpowers when it comes to investing. And the superpower is time. Okay. And because of that, you don't have to take on a huge amount of risk. And so when I think of risk, I'm thinking at the low end are government bonds, right? Or treasury bills. And then maybe one or few steps up from that, we would call corporate bonds. A couple of steps up from that would be stocks, like a diversified portfolio of stocks. And then riskier and riskier tend to go with cryptocurrency, maybe meme stocks. Many people who are in college, they find the meme stock and the cryptocurrency really attractive because we hear about all of these crazy stories. But what we don't hear are all the horror stories associated with that, right? So like nobody is going to go on YouTube and say, yeah, I just lost like $400,000. Like people don't do that. If you win or if you make $400,000, rest assured somebody's going to be on YouTube spitting out that shit immediately. But nobody really like shares the downside. And I promise you, there is a ton of downside. And so when we're young, I would say your primary strategy would be to take on calculated risk. And by calculated risk, I mean a basket of stocks. You don't have to worry about bonds. You don't have to worry about cash or government securities. Look, just start with the S&P 500 index fund and use that as your base, okay? But diversification, in addition to getting started, are the two big first pillars. Then we want to do it for a really, really long time, right? So yeah, I could try to invest for a couple of years and I could make a little dent, but what we really want to do, and the superpower that a lot of college students have, is that they have time, right? And so here's the general rule. Let's say that we put, I don't know, $300 into a diversified portfolio of stocks like the S&P 500. And then we do that every month, right? $300 every month. And we just start consistently doing that. In about 25 years, we're going to have about $500,000, right? Not anything to be super excited about. However, the general rule is that your money is going to double every 6 to 7 years, right? So if I'm 45 and I have $500,000, then I don't know, 6 years from there, I'm going to have $1 million at 51 years old. And then 6 more years when I hit 57, I'm going to have 2 million. And then 6 more years after that, when I hit 63, I'm going to have 4 million. I don't know. Maybe by the time I hit 69, I'm going to have 8 million. And look, I get it. 69 is fucking old. But the point is that if our money doubles every 6 years, we want to get to that $500,000 threshold as fast as possible. Actually, not as fast as possible, but as young as possible. Because we want the 500 to double to $1 million, and then our $1 million to double to 2 million, and then 2 million hopefully to double to 4 million. What I don't want is to get to age 50 and have $25,000. And then when I hit 56, I have $50,000. And then when I hit 60, what is that, 2, I've got $100,000. Like the sooner that we get started, the faster, again, not faster, but the sooner we get started, the earlier in life we can start doubling significant amounts of money, right? And so the superpower, in addition to getting started and diversifying, is getting started and diversifying as soon as possible, and especially when you're young, right? Those are the 3 things that I think you totally have going for you. The other thing I believe that doesn't really have much to do about investing, that you have going for you is that most college students are living with the bare minimum. Okay. You don't spend a whole lot of money. And so as you earn more, or as you progress through life and you begin to earn more, you can be more conscious about the way that you choose to spend those jumps in salary, right? You could either get a nicer place to live, nicer car, nicer clothes, or you can start funneling more money into your investment accounts. Okay, fourth rule, and it's not even a rule, but now it's time to start talking about some specifics. So where do we get started? A common thing that a lot of people get tripped up on is, what type of account do I want to open? Okay. When we go to a brokerage company like Fidelity or Empower or Ameritrade or Robinhood, we are going to be given a choice, and we're going to be asked what kind of account we want to open up. And there's usually two options. Let's say there's three options. The first one is just a traditional account. Okay. You can put whatever you want into it and you can take it out whenever you want. They call those just traditional brokerage accounts. The second and third are retirement accounts, meaning you can put a certain amount in and then you can't take anything out. Generally, you can't take anything out until you hit 63, 64, 65, until you get close to retirement. And so the general rule that I tell most people, and what I am making my kids do, is I encourage them to use a retirement account. The general rule is that is the first that we need to be focused on when it comes to investing and when it comes to retirement, is retirement planning. The assumption is nobody's going to be around to take care of us when we get to that point. And so we got to watch out for ourselves starting now. And so I force my kids to allocate 15% of everything they make to their retirement account. And their retirement accounts, you have the choice between a Roth account and a regular account. And as somebody who's young and not paying a whole lot of taxes, I would encourage you, and this is what I make my kids do, use a Roth account. So a Roth account is you put after-tax dollars in, and then you take everything out at the end tax-free. So if you have $3 million in your account when you hit retirement, that entire $3 million is yours. The traditional retirement account, like a regular IRA, individual retirement account, that will allow you to contribute before you pay taxes. And so it lowers your tax liability today. But then when you take things out, you pay taxes at the end. And again, it is a very complicated issue, but if you are young and barely making anything, you're probably at the lowest tax rate you're ever going to be at. And so it makes sense for you to go ahead and pay your taxes now, so that when you're really making money in retirement and you've got millions in your account, you can take that out tax-free. Now, the downside to going with a retirement account is that you don't get to touch it until you hit retirement. And so if you're 19, man, that's fucking 40 years from now, right? It could possibly be 35 years, depending on when we're getting started. And so here's the general rule again that I force my kids to follow. And that is, the primary amount of money that you have to invest should be going to your retirement accounts. Now, that doesn't mean everything has to go to your retirement accounts, because it would be nice to invest and to be able to take withdrawals or have access to the money that you make before you hit retirement. So if you have $100 to spend or $100 to invest, maybe you put $85 into your retirement account and $15 into just a traditional account that you have access to whenever you want it. And that way you are not having to wait forever for some of your money. But the general rule is that we typically want to allocate 15% of what we make to our retirement accounts. And obviously, if we're starting out and we're really young, we don't really have to stick to the 15% because we're starting so early. And so we can afford to drop down to maybe 10% or 7%. But the idea is that the primary approach really should be the retirement accounts first. Other issues that we want to think about, I hear all the time from my students, what do you think of Bitcoin, Professor Heath? And My honest opinion is I don't really know a whole lot about it. I probably should, but if you asked me to describe what Bitcoin is, I'd probably have a really fucking hard time telling you what it is. And I get it. It's like blockchain, blah, 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 blah. But to me, it's a bunch of just mumbo jumbo shit. And in honesty, it seems like gambling. And so I'm not going to sit here and tell you not to do it when I know for a fact that tons of people do it, especially a lot of my students. And so like, I'm never telling my students not to do it. And I'm definitely not telling my kids not to do it. But what I do force my kids to do again first is to employ the traditional slow man's approach, which is 15% of your income should go to your retirement. It maybe doesn't have to be 15, it could be 10, and 5% can go to something else. So 5% can go to meme stocks, or 5% can go to Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency. But again, as long as you are employing multiple approaches, one of them and the primary approach being something that takes advantage of your superpower, which is your age, man, I would definitely encourage you to do it. And again, like I said, I force my kids to do that. How about a bad day, right? So let's say you open up your account and you are down 20%, just an absolute abysmal day. In fact, it's probably hard to imagine that we would ever be down that much if we are proactively diversifying. But let's say that we are proactively diversifying and you just have a terrible day, terrible month, and just like nonstop losing. Every time you open your account, you're losing. I asked Kenyon, Kaysen, and Tyrese like what they would do, and all three of them were basically saying the same thing that I think, which is just because you're having a bad day doesn't mean you should give up. And when it comes to investing, especially when you're starting really young, is that you're going to have days where things just don't go your way. And in fact, when we were recording that last episode, I was losing like 30, 60,000 a day. Today I opened up an account and I was like up, I think 15,000 in the morning. And then just recently within the last few hours, I think I'm down about 8,000. And again, that's pretty common, right? So there will be swings in the market. And when we are in it for the long haul, these little dips here and there aren't something that we really should be worried about. Okay. If we're investing in the S&P 500, the average annual return, there's some argument. It could be as low as 8%. It could be as high as 12%. But the idea is you're going to hit an average of between 8 and 12%. But that doesn't mean that every year you're going to hit exactly something between 8 and 12%. Some years you can have a return of 18%. And other years you could have maybe a loss of 2%. But on average, you're going to get to somewhere between 8 and 12. So those bad days, those bad months, and even those bad years, you want to consistently be contributing to your accounts, okay? Especially if you're young. In fact, I asked those three guys what they would do if things were tanking. Would they take their money out? But then I also asked, would you put more money in? And all three of them were like, I don't know. It seems kind of, they didn't know. And in my opinion, if I was 20 years old and shit was like tanking, I would be loving that, right? Because to me, it would be like things are on sale. You want things to be cheap now while you are buying assets. But then as you progress in life, you're going to want them rebounding. And so to me, you almost want to see your accounts losing a little here and there. Okay, we talked about, in fact, I asked those guys as well. I asked them, what would they do if they had $1,000 in cash? Would they pay off a credit card that had $1,000 balance on it, or would they invest? And the right answer is you want to pay off your credit card in full every month, period. And the reason is because your interest rate in your credit cards is substantially greater than the returns that you could be earning in a well-diversified, calculated risk portfolio like the S&P 500, maybe we earn 12% in the market and we're paying 21% on our credit card. So if I had $1,000 and I put it in the stock market and didn't pay my credit card, right, I'd be incurring $210 in interest, 1,000 times 21%, and I would be making $120 in the stock market, $1,000 times 12%. So I would be kind of losing ground, right? I would only be making 110, but I would be paying 210 in high interest. Yeah, I'm moving backwards. So the general rule is we always want to get rid of our credit card debt first before we do anything. And then a lot of people will tell us that we should have an emergency fund, and I've covered that. And that generally should be at least 1 month's worth of spending, ideally 6 months. But then once you get finished with that, then the next step is to really start investing. And then your primary approach with investing should be dedicated to retirement. If you're young, your dedicated approach should involve a Roth IRA. In my opinion, that is what I make my kids do. I force them to not only use a Roth IRA, but also to invest in the S&P 500. It is, again, a well-defined portfolio of stocks. And then here is a secret for you, for those that are still listening. One of the best things that you can do for yourself after you open up your account, after you identify the S&P 500 index fund, you automate your contributions, meaning you just set it up so that automatically at the end of every month, money goes from your checking account to your investment account. Of all the things that I've done for my kids, I have created automatic transfer for both of them so that each kid, money is taken out of their checking account and put into their investment accounts every month, right? So in addition to getting started and being diversified, taking on calculated risk, we also want to be consistent. It's not good enough for us to do this for a few months, a few years, and then stop. We consistently want to set aside money throughout the years, right? It doesn't help us if we start early, but we don't actually follow that up with being consistent.